All right. So if you're like me and you love pushing it on a ride, but you hit that wall and wonder, how can I keep this energy going, especially on those longer efforts? Well, you've probably heard about these things called energy gels. Okay.
And we're going to dive deep into them today.
Yeah, so today we're going deep on these little packets of, I don't know, what should we call it, go-go juice? I don't know.
Yeah.
But an evidence-based analysis of energy gels
Yeah.
and how they can affect your performance on the bike.
That's right. We want to give you the information to make the best decisions for yourself about how and when to use these gels.
Exactly.
We're going to be looking at a lot of things like what are they actually made of?
Right.
How do they actually benefit you as a cyclist? Are there any downsides?
Yeah, are they bad for you?
Um, when should you use them and how should you use them?
Right.
And we'll even talk about some alternatives if those are better for you.
Exactly. Yeah, so first things first, what are these things? What are energy gels?
Well, at the most basic level, they're a concentrated source of carbohydrates. And, as a cyclist, you need carbs.
Right.
And these are meant to give you energy on those long rides when you start to feel that bonk coming on.
Yeah.
And so it's really just a super accessible fuel source when you're out there for a while.
Yeah. So what's the secret sauce? What are they made of that makes them tick?
So usually it's a mix of different types of carbs.
Okay.
Like simple sugars like glucose and fructose,
Okay.
as well as those complex carbs, but the ones that are really easy to digest like maltodextrin.
Oh, okay.
And they're all chosen because they're absorbed into the body very quickly.
Okay, so give me an example, like a specific energy gel. What's in that?
Sure. So like if you look at a GU energy gel,
Okay.
a standard packet is like 32 grams and it has about 100 calories.
Okay.
And most of those calories come from the 22 grams of carbs in it, which is usually a mix of, like I said, the maltodextrin and the fructose.
Okay.
And then you'll also find a decent amount of sodium in there, usually like 60 milligrams.
Right.
And that's really important for keeping you hydrated and helping those nutrients get where they need to go in your body.
Okay, so it's basically like a quick hit of sugar that your body can easily use.
Exactly.
But this analysis we're looking at, it talks about like why that specific mix of sugars and the maltodextrin is so important for cyclists. So can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so when you're cycling, especially for those long rides, over 90 minutes,
Right.
your muscles and your liver, they start to run out of their stored carbs, which is called glycogen.
Right.
And that's basically your body's energy reserve for carbs.
Yeah.
And as that runs low, you start to feel tired, you get that bonk.
Yeah.
And so the sugars in the maltodextrin in the gels, they get broken down super fast into glucose, and that goes straight into your bloodstream.
Okay.
And then your muscles can use that glucose as fuel right away.
Oh, okay.
So it's like refueling on the fly.
Yeah, it's like you're running low on gas and you pull over and fill up real quick.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's really cool because it helps to replenish that glycogen that you're using up, and it keeps your blood sugar levels stable.
Right.
So you can keep going at the same intensity without hitting that wall.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I know this is getting a little nerdy, but this analysis also talked about something interesting about how glucose and fructose are absorbed differently in the gut.
Yeah.
So can you explain that?
Yeah. So glucose and fructose, they actually use different pathways to get into your system.
Okay.
And gels that have a specific ratio of these sugars, often around 2.1 glucose to fructose, they can actually help you absorb even more carbs.
Wow.
Which is really important if you're, doing a super long endurance event or you're really pushing your limits.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. So it's like, you're giving your body multiple ways to fuel up.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really cool. Okay, so we talked about the sugars. We talked about maltodextrin. What are some of the other ingredients that we might find in these gels?
Well, some of them will have things like branched chain amino acids, so
Yeah.
BCAAs.
PCA.
Yeah, and there's some research that suggests they might help with mental fatigue,
Okay.
especially during those really long rides.
Yeah.
And then another common one is caffeine,
Of course. Yeah.
which is, well known for helping you feel more alert and giving you that extra boost.
Yeah. Definitely can help with endurance too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And focus, staying mentally sharp.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so that's a good overview, but you mentioned that the ingredients can change from gel to gel.
Yeah.
So is there anything else we should know about that?
It's really important to remember that, different brands are going to have different formulas.
Right.
So it's always a good idea to check the label,
Yeah, read the label.
before you buy something new.
Yeah, for sure. And what about those isotonic gels? I've seen those around. They seem a little different.
Yeah, so isotonic gels are interesting.
Okay.
They're designed to have the same concentration of dissolved particles as your body fluids.
Mhm.
You can kind of think of it like the concentration of salt in like your tears or something.
Okay.
Um, and so a good example of this is the Cisco isotonic energy gel.
Okay.
A typical serving of that has about 22 grams of maltodextrin.
Okay.
But the important thing is that they're made so that you don't need to drink extra water with them.
Oh, that's interesting.
So they're already kind of pre-diluted.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a more self-contained fueling option.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the analysis also talked about some other brands like Never 2 that are doing similar things with their formulas.
Okay.
Like they're really focusing on specific blends of water, maltodextrin, and fructose
Right.
to get a specific energy release.
Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so before we move on from this, I remember the analysis had a table comparing all these different energy gels.
It does, yeah.
Can we talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so table 1, it shows you like all the nutritional information side by side for a bunch of different popular gels. And you can see like how they differ in serving size, total calories, how many carbs they have, what types of sugar,
Right.
how much sodium, caffeine, and all those other ingredients.
Yeah, so if you're looking at that table, what are some of the things that really stand out to you?
Well, one of the things that really jumps out is that the amount of carbs per serving can vary a lot.
Okay.
Like, for example, Morton gels.
Yeah.
They tend to have a higher carb content.
Okay.
Like one of their 40-gram gels has about 25 grams of carbs in it.
Wow. Okay.
And then you have brands like Forte
Okay.
that are more focused on using natural sources of carbs,
Okay.
like brown rice syrup and maple syrup.
Okay, so it's not just like pure sugar.
Yeah,
It's like they're trying to use more natural ingredients.
exactly.
That's cool. Okay, so now that we have a good idea of what's in these gels, what do they actually do for us cyclists? What are the benefits?
Well, the biggest benefit, and this is backed up by a lot of research, is that they're a really quick and easy source of fuel. And when you're riding for a long time, like we said, your glycogen stores start to run low.
Right.
And these gels, they give you that concentrated dose of carbs that your body can absorb super fast and use right away.
Right. So they're like a direct counter to that bonking feeling,
Yeah,
when you just run out of energy.
And by helping keep your blood sugar at a good level,
Right.
you can maintain your pace and power output for a lot longer.
Yeah.
It's basically like making sure your engine has enough fuel to keep running smoothly.
Right. And we talked about the sodium earlier, but that plays a role in this too, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's not just about getting fuel, it's about making sure your muscles can actually use it.
Right. So the sodium is really important for hydration,
Right.
but it also helps with muscle function.
Okay.
And it can even help prevent something called hyponatremia,
Okay.
which is when your sodium levels get too low.
Oh, okay.
And that can be dangerous, especially on those really long hot rides.
Yeah. That's good to know. Okay, so we've got that cart down. What else is good about energy gels?
Well, one of the other big advantages is that they're so convenient.
Right.
You can just stick them in your jersey pocket.
Yeah.
And you can fuel up without having to stop,
Yeah.
which is super helpful during a race or, a tough ride where you don't want to lose any momentum.
Yeah, it's definitely easier than trying to eat like a banana or a sandwich while you're riding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And compared to those traditional snacks,
Yeah.
gels are absorbed much faster.
Right.
So you get that energy boost almost immediately.
Right. So it's like instant energy.
Pretty much. Yeah.
And we talked about some gels having those added benefits like electrolytes and caffeine.
Right.
So can you remind us what those do for us?
So the electrolytes, they help to replace the minerals that you lose through sweat,
Okay.
which is really important for staying hydrated
Okay.
and preventing cramps.
Right.
And then caffeine, as we said, it can give you that mental and physical boost
Right.
to help fight off fatigue.
Yeah, definitely helpful. So to sum it all up, it sounds like the main benefits are improved endurance, less muscle fatigue, and overall better performance,
Yeah,
which is what we're all looking for, right?
Right.
But are there any downsides to energy gels? Are there any things we should be aware of?
Yeah, so there are a few potential downsides that you should definitely consider.
Okay.
One of the most common ones is that they can cause stomach problems,
Oh, okay.
especially if you have a sensitive stomach,
Right.
because they're so concentrated,
Yeah.
especially the ones with a lot of sugar.
Right.
They can cause cramps, bloating, nausea, or even diarrhea.
Oh, that's no good.
Yeah, and this can be even worse if you're not drinking enough water,
Okay.
because you need water to help digest and absorb those gels.
Right.
So if you don't have enough water, they can just sit in your stomach
Yeah.
and cause discomfort.
Okay, so hydration is key.
It's super important.
Yeah. What else should we be careful of?
Well, another thing to keep in mind is that your body can only absorb so many carbs per hour.
Okay.
So you need carbs for fuel.
Right.
but there's a limit to how much you can actually use.
Right.
And research suggests that that limit is somewhere around 60 grams per hour
Okay.
if you're just using a single source of carbs.
Okay.
Um, but there are these dual source gels that use different pathways to get into your system.
Right. We talked about that.
And those can potentially push that limit up to 90 grams per hour.
Oh, okay.
But if you eat way more than you can absorb,
Right.
it's not going to give you more energy. It's just going to upset your stomach.
Yeah, it's not going to end well.
No.
Okay, so what about the ingredients themselves? Is there anything in there that we should be wary of?
Well, some gels use artificial sweeteners, colors, additives, and preservatives.
Okay.
And some people might be trying to avoid those.
Yeah, if you're trying to eat clean.
Exactly.
And I mean, let's be honest, some gels just don't taste that great. And the texture can be a little weird.
Yeah.
So if you don't like the taste or the texture.
It can be hard to make yourself use them.
Yeah, exactly.
And then one other thing to think about is that, you don't want to rely on gels too much.
Right.
You still need a balanced diet with whole foods.
Right.
So they're a good supplement,
Yeah,
but they shouldn't be your only source of nutrition.
exactly. Okay, so we've talked about traditional gels, isotonic gels. Are there any other types of gels that we should know about?
Yeah, there are actually a lot of different types of gels out there.
Okay.
So besides those two, we have caffeinated gels,
Right.
which, as we said, can give you that extra mental and physical boost.
Yeah.
And the amount of caffeine varies depending on the brand.
Right.
So you can choose one that fits your tolerance.
Yeah, like if you're sensitive to caffeine, you might want to go with a lower dose.
Exactly.
And then there are gels with electrolytes.
Right. Those are really good for longer rides or more intense rides,
Okay.
especially when it's hot out, because they help replace those minerals you lose through sweat.
Yeah, which is so important.
And they can also help prevent muscle cramps.
Right.
And then there are these dual source carb gels.
Right. We talked about those a little bit.
They usually combine glucose and fructose.
Yeah.
And the idea is to maximize your carb absorption.
Okay.
And some people find that they're easier on the stomach too.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
And then there are also gels that focus on natural ingredients.
Right. Like chia seeds or honey.
Okay.
Or they avoid using artificial flavors in those gelling agents.
Right. So they're like the more natural option.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a gel for everyone.
Yeah, pretty much.
But how do you know which one is right for you?
Well, it really depends on a few things.
Okay.
Like what your stomach can handle,
Right.
how long and how hard you're riding,
Right.
and what your goals are.
Yeah. So are you just trying to finish the ride or are you trying to win a race? And I remember there's a table in the analysis that breaks all this down.
Yeah, so table 2, it compares all the different types of gels,
Okay.
like the traditional ones, isotonic caffeinated electrolytes,
Right.
dual source carb, natural and high carb.
Okay.
And it talks about like the key features of each one
Right.
and what they're good for.
Yeah. So you can kind of see at a glance which one might be right for you.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've got all that down. What's the best way to use these gels during a ride?
Okay, so timing is everything.
Okay.
You usually don't need to use gels for rides that are less than 90 minutes
Okay.
because your body has enough stored energy for that.
Right.
But if you're going longer than that,
Yeah.
then it's a good idea to start using gels.
Okay.
And a good rule of thumb is to have your first gel somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes into the ride.
Okay.
That way you're letting your body use up some of its own fuel first.
Right. So you're not just like overloading on sugar right away. And then how often should you be taking gels after that?
Well, it depends on how hard you're working
Right.
and how your body feels.
Right.
But generally, you should aim for one gel every 30 to 60 minutes.
Okay.
And you want to try to get about 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour
Okay.
if you're doing moderate intensity.
Right.
And if you're doing something like an ultra-endurance event,
Yeah.
you might need to go up to 90 grams of carbs per hour.
Okay. So it's really individualized.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what about before a ride? Should you be taking a gel beforehand?
Some people like to have a gel 15 to 30 minutes before a long or hard ride,
Okay.
just to make sure their energy stores are topped off.
Right. Kind of like a pre-fuel.
Yeah, exactly.
And we talked about hydration with traditional gels.
Yes.
So can you remind us about that?
Yeah, so with those more concentrated gels,
Right.
it's super important to drink water before and after you have the gel,
Okay.
just to help with digestion and absorption.
Okay.
But remember, the isotonic gels, they're different. You
Right.
don't need extra water with those.
Okay.
And one other thing to keep in mind is that you should never try a new gel for the first time on race day.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, you want to experiment with different gels and different timings during your training rides,
Right.
so you know what works for you and what doesn't.
Yeah, you don't want any surprises on race day.
Exactly.
And the most important thing is to listen to your body.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you're feeling good, you might not need as many gels. If you're
Mhm.
feeling tired, you might need more.
Right.
And gels are just one part of your overall fueling strategy.
Exactly.
So you might also want to use sports drinks or energy bars or even whole foods,
Yeah.
especially on those really long rides.
Right.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about gels. What if someone doesn't want to use gels or they can't tolerate them? Are there any other options for fueling during a ride?
Yeah, there are a bunch of other things you can use.
Okay.
So for those longer, less intense rides,
Yeah.
you can actually just use whole foods.
Okay.
They can give you that sustained energy.
Okay.
And a lot of people find them more appealing than gels.
Yeah.
Um, so some good examples are bananas,
Yeah.
dried fruits like
Yeah.
raisins or apricots,
Okay.
energy bars,
Right.
rice cakes,
Okay.
and even small sandwiches that are easy to digest.
Okay.
Um, and the analysis mentioned a couple of interesting homemade options too,
Oh, yeah. What were those?
like banana French toast cakes.
Oh, wow. That sounds good.
Yeah. And sweet potato pancake sandwiches.
Okay.
Those might be better for before or after a ride,
Yeah.
but they're a good example of how whole foods can give you sustained energy,
Right.
especially for those longer, slower rides.
Right. Where you don't need that instant energy boost.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So what about drinks? Are there any energy drinks that we can use?
Yeah. So sports drinks,
Right.
they usually have a mix of carbs and electrolytes,
Okay.
and they're good for rides that are between like an hour and a half and 3 hours. They give you both hydration and fuel.
Right.
And some people even make their own sports drinks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just using simple ingredients.
That's cool. Um, okay. And what about those energy chews? I've seen those around too.
Yeah, so energy chews,
Okay.
they're basically like gels, but in a solid form.
Okay.
So you chew them,
Right.
and they give you carbs,
Okay.
but they release them a little more gradually,
Okay.
which some people find easier to stomach.
Okay. So it's kind of like a slower release of energy.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, okay. So it sounds like there are a lot of different options for fueling.
There are, yeah.
How do you know which one is right for you?
Well, again, it depends on the type of ride
Right.
and the individual.
Right.
If you're doing a really high-intensity ride,
Yeah.
gels are still probably the best option
Yeah.
because they give you that energy so fast.
Right.
But if you're doing a longer, slower ride,
Yeah.
you might be better off with whole foods. And a lot of people find that using a combination of different things, gels and drinks and solids,
Right.
is the best way to fuel those really long rides.
Yeah.
And it helps prevent you from getting sick of the same taste.
Yeah. That makes sense. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
How do we put it all together? How do we figure out what's best for each of us individually?
Well, like we said, personalization is key.
Right.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to fueling.
Right.
So you need to think about your own needs and preferences and how your body reacts to different things.
Yeah.
So, think about how long your rides are,
Okay.
how intense they are.
Okay.
If you know you have a sensitive stomach,
Yeah.
you might want to try those isotonic gels
Right.
or the ones with natural ingredients.
Right.
And it's really important to experiment during your training rides
Yeah.
to see what works for you.
Exactly.
And, don't forget about taste. You're more likely to use something if you actually enjoy it.
Exactly.
And think about whether you need caffeine or electrolytes,
Yeah.
depending on the ride in your own body.
Right.
And of course, budget is always a factor.
Yeah.
And whether you prefer natural or more processed ingredients.
Right. So there's a lot to think about.
There is, yeah.
And the analysis had a table for this too, right?
Yeah, table 3, it lists all those key considerations that we just talked about.
Okay.
So you can kind of use that as a checklist.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Okay, so it sounds like the main takeaway here is that we need to be informed.
Yeah.
And we need to experiment
Exactly.
to find what works best for us.
Right.
Well, this has been a really great deep dive into energy gels.
I agree.
Thanks for walking us through all this information.
You're welcome.
So for our listeners out there, what's the most important thing to remember about energy gels?
I would say the key takeaway is that energy gels can be a really powerful tool
Yeah.
to help you improve your cycling performance,
Yeah.
especially on those longer, harder rides.
Yeah.
Because they give you those carbs that you need so quickly.
Yeah.
And they can really help you prevent that bonking feeling.
Right. And they're so convenient.
Exactly.
But it's important to be aware of the potential downsides.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
the stomach problems.
Right.
And you have to make sure you're staying hydrated,
Absolutely.
especially with those traditional gels.
Right.
But the good news is that there are so many different types of gels out there
Yeah.
that you can find one that works for you.
Exactly.
And ultimately, the decision of whether or not to use gels and which ones to use,
Yeah.
it's a personal one.
Right.
You have to experiment and see what works best for your body.
Yeah.
But when you use them strategically
Right.
and as part of a balanced diet and hydration plan,
Yeah.
they can be a huge asset to your cycling.
Yeah. They can really make a difference.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. You're welcome.
And for you, our listeners, we want to leave you with something to think about.
Yes.
So given all these different types of gels and all these different formulations,
Right.
when would you consider using energy gels in your own cycling?
Yeah.
And what factors are most important to you when you're choosing a gel?
Right.
Those are some good questions to ponder until our next deep dive.
Until next time.
See you later.